In the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, Desmond grows up with his family, including his brother Hal,
You don't quit it! You quit it!
his deeply religious mother Bertha, and his father Tom, a former soldier. One afternoon, a fight between Desmond and Hal escalates, and Desmond, in an act of self-defense, nearly kills his brother with a brick. Hal survives, but the violent experience leaves Desmond shaken. His mother's words only deepen his guilt. She tells him that what he did was the gravest sin of all. 15 years later, while helping at the local church, Desmond witnesses a man get into an accident on the street. Without hesitation, he rushes to help, using his belt as a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. He then takes the injured man to the hospital, where the doctor praises his quick thinking, telling him that he just saved a life. Watching the nurses and doctors work, Desmond feels something stir inside him. He has always dreamed of becoming a doctor, but he never had the proper education to pursue it. That same day, he meets a nurse named Dorothy and is instantly captivated by her. Desperate for an excuse to talk to her, he even agrees to donate blood on the spot.
I'm just here to take blood.
I'll give you mine.
Okay.
The next day, he returns to the hospital, dressed sharply, determined to flirt with Dorothy and ask her out. Their first date goes well, even though Desmond is still figuring out how to talk to women.
You need to watch where you're going.
However, Dorothy is slightly taken aback when he kisses her without warning. She would have preferred if he had asked first. Despite this awkward moment, their relationship blossoms. Dorothy shares medical books with him, helping him learn more about medicine. A few days later, Hal shocks the family by announcing that he has enlisted in the army to fight in World War II. He waited until it was a done deal before telling them, knowing they would disapprove. He is right. Bertha hates the idea because taking a life goes against God's commandments, and the sight of Hal in uniform triggers painful memories for Tom. Unable to bear it, Tom asks his son to leave the room. Not long after, Desmond tells Dorothy that he also plans to enlist, but as a medic.
I can't stay here while all them go fight for me.
Wanting to make things right before he leaves, he proposes to Dorothy, and she says yes.
So are you gonna ask me to marry you or what?
Well, I'm asking you. With all my heart and then some. You marry me?
Then yes.
They set a date for their wedding, planning to marry when he gets his first leave. Before leaving, Desmond visits his father, who is at the cemetery standing by the graves of his fallen friends. With bitterness in his voice, Tom speaks of how foolish they were to believe in glory and war. He admits that he doesn't want to bury his sons too and has little hope that Desmond can survive armed with nothing but his convictions. On the day Desmond departs for training in Fort Jackson, Dorothy gives him a Bible with her picture inside. It's a token of love and faith to carry with him into the unknown. Upon arriving at Fort Jackson, Desmond meets his fellow privates, including Smitty, who mockingly calls him two-wheeler while casually flipping a knife.
Oh, hey.
Their assigned drill sergeant, Howell, makes a dramatic entrance, catching everyone off guard with a deafening scream. The sudden shock causes Smitty to drop his knife right onto his own foot, while another private, still undressed, doesn't even have time to put his clothes on. Sergeant Howell is the definition of a military stereotype, loud, aggressive, and quick to insult every soldier based on their appearance. Desmond, however, finds his over-the-top antics oddly amusing. As for the private who failed to dress in time, he's punished by being forced to start training completely naked. During basic training, Desmond struggles with tying knots.
What do we got here, Doss? One for each titty.
But his upbringing in the mountains gives him an advantage on the obstacle course, allowing him to excel. The real trouble begins when they move on to weapon handling, and Desmond flat out refuses to pick up a rifle. Howell immediately drags Desmond to Captain Glover's office, where Desmond explains that he was told he wouldn't be required to handle weapons, and should never have been assigned to an infantry unit in the first place. He clarifies that as a Seventh-day Adventist, he cannot work on Saturdays because it is his Sabbath. Glover finds the whole situation laughable. Convinced that Desmond is unreliable in battle if he refuses to follow basic orders, he sends him for a Section 8 psychiatric evaluation, assuming he must be unfit for service. Later, Howell addresses the other privates in the most condescending way possible, informing them of Desmond's refusal to fight. He makes it clear that Desmond cannot be trusted in combat. That night, just before lights out, Smitty tries to provoke Desmond by snatching his Bible, hoping to push him into a fight. But Desmond remains calm, simply asking for it back with a polite please, refusing to react to the taunt. The next day, Desmond undergoes his psychiatric evaluation. He explains that he doesn't hear voices or have any delusions. He's fully aware of his differences, but is simply a man of strong faith, not a madman. The doctor determines that Desmond is completely sane and does not qualify for a Section 8 discharge. By law, this means he is permitted to continue serving as a combat medic as long as he meets all other training requirements. However, Captain Glover still wants him gone. Since he can't legally discharge him, he orders Howell to make Desmond's life miserable. From that point on, Desmond is assigned the most grueling tasks, including scrubbing toilets. Howell also takes things further by kicking Desmond's bed one morning, making it clear to the entire barracks that no one will be getting their scheduled weekend leave, and heavily implying that it's all Desmond's fault. The resentment boils over, and that night, the other privates gang up on Desmond, beating him badly. Smitty, watching from a distance, wonders why Desmond insists on staying. The next morning, Howell sees Desmond covered in bruises, and, for the first time, seems to show genuine concern. He advises Desmond to leave for his own good, but Desmond refuses, determined to stand by his beliefs no matter the cost. Desmond refuses to name the men who beat him, nor does he even acknowledge that he was attacked. Instead, he insists that his bruises were caused by an accident. When the unit completes training, the soldiers are granted leave, except for Desmond, who is arrested for insubordination.
And you will spend the duration of the war in a military prison.
I can't, sir.
I'm not asking you, Private!
Meanwhile, Dorothy waits for him at the altar, but deep down, she knows something must have happened. Desmond would never abandon her like this. Locked in his cell, Desmond experiences a moment of emotional breakdown. But when Captain Glover visits, he remains calm. Glover offers him a way out. If Desmond pleads guilty, he can be released without formal charges. But Desmond refuses, standing firm in his convictions. Dorothy later visits him, pleading with him to let go of his pride and simply complete the rifle training. She reminds him that shooting a rifle doesn't necessarily mean killing. Still, Desmond remains unmoved. Seeing no other option, Dorothy calls Tom and Bertha, desperate to find another way to help him. That night, Desmond's sleep is haunted by nightmares. Memories of the day he confronted his father as he beat his mother. The horror of wresting the gun away from him. The next morning, Tom arrives at Fort Jackson wearing his old uniform, decorated with all his medals. Without hesitation, he demands to speak with his former commanding officer, who now holds the rank of Brigadier General. At Desmond's court-martial, he maintains his plea of not guilty. Just as he is about to be sentenced, Tom barges into the courtroom, carrying a letter from the Brigadier General. The letter reminds everyone that the right to be a conscientious objector is protected by the U.S. Constitution. Not wanting to risk a conflict with Congress, the tribunal has no choice but to drop the case. Desmond is cleared of all charges and allowed to begin training as a combat medic.
Private Doss, you are free to run into the hellfire of battle without a single weapon to protect yourself.
To celebrate his hard-fought victory, Desmond and Dorothy finally marry, sharing their first night together as husband and wife. By 1945, Desmond's 77th Division is deployed to Okinawa, sent straight into the Pacific theater of war. The moment they arrive, they are confronted with a brutal sight, piles of bodies being hauled away like garbage. The harsh reality sets in. They are here to replace the men who fell before them. The remaining survivors of the 96th Division merge with Glover's unit, and Desmond is introduced to two other medics. It is here that they learn about Maida Escarpment, known to the soldiers as Hacksaw Ridge. The Americans have attempted to capture it 6 times, but each time, the Japanese forces have pushed them back with relentless precision. The enemy deliberately targets the wounded, so Desmond is forced to remove his Red Cross insignia to avoid drawing attention. He is also issued a new helmet for additional protection. A few days later, the unit reaches Hacksaw Ridge. Securing this position is critical. Whoever controls Okinawa gains control of Japan itself. The U.S. Navy initiates the assault, bombarding enemy positions to weaken the Japanese defenses. As the battlefield is engulfed in explosions and smoke, Glover's unit seizes the moment and climbs the ridge, ready for combat. The battle is nothing short of brutal, with both sides suffering devastating losses. But Desmond never falters. He continues to save as many men as he can, including those who are usually left behind, deemed missing or beyond saving. Several times, Japanese soldiers come dangerously close to capturing him, but Smitty fights fiercely, killing them all to protect Desmond at any cost. After long hours of brutal combat, night falls, and the American unit decides to dig in and set up camp, holding their position with plans to finish clearing the ridge in the morning. Howell reminds everyone that going out alone is too dangerous, so they should even relieve themselves in their foxholes rather than risk exposure. But Desmond, unwilling to leave any wounded behind, insists on searching for survivors.
Where the hell you going, Doss?
Still more wounded out there, Sergeant.
I'll go with him. Be smart. Keep your ears down.
Desmond manages to bring back a couple of injured soldiers before he and Smitty take shelter in a foxhole. By now, Smitty's attitude toward Desmond has completely changed. After witnessing him in action, he respects him deeply. The two even exchange light-hearted jokes, their bond strengthened by the battlefield. When Desmond falls asleep, he is haunted by a nightmare. Enemy soldiers storm their foxhole and kill them both. He wakes up on the verge of a breakdown and shares his dream with Smitty, who is stunned to realize that Desmond doesn't even pick up a weapon in his own subconscious. As they wait for dawn, Desmond finally opens up about his deep aversion to guns. One night, after enduring years of watching his drunk father beat his mother, he had finally had enough. He confronted Tom, wresting a gun from his hands and aiming it at him. But in that moment, instead of feeling powerful, Desmond saw his father collapse to his knees in tears. It felt as if he had killed him in his heart. That day, he swore to God that he would never touch a weapon again. In return, Smitty shares a piece of his own past. He never knew his father, and his mother abandoned him in an orphanage when he was a child. At dawn, the Japanese army launches a fierce counterattack, catching the Americans off guard as they struggle to wake up. Howell immediately orders a retreat. The naval fleet provides cover, but the chaos is overwhelming. In the midst of it, Smitty is fatally wounded before Desmond can carry him to safety. With no other option, the American forces are forced to retreat down the ridge. But Desmond doesn't follow. He hears the cries of wounded men left behind and feels a divine calling to help them. Captain Glover, leading the retreat, gathers the remaining survivors and leaves behind only a couple of soldiers to observe the battlefield. Ignoring his own safety, Desmond races through the carnage, rescuing as many injured soldiers as he can. Using a rope, he carefully lowers them down the ridge one by one. Hours pass, and Glover, realizing what's happening, calls in artillery strikes to provide Desmond cover and save more lives. However, this also exposes Howell, Desmond, and the remaining soldiers, making them visible and vulnerable to the Japanese forces. But even this is not enough to make Desmond give up. Jeeps arrive to collect the wounded soldiers he lowers down the ridge, but he keeps going, even as Japanese troops move dangerously close. Moments later, he finds an injured soldier and quickly buries him under the dirt before covering himself with a corpse to stay hidden. The trick works. The Japanese pass by without noticing them, allowing Desmond to safely retrieve the wounded soldier and continue his mission. Meanwhile, Glover desperately pleads with his superiors for reinforcements, but they remain hesitant. As the battle rages on, Desmond makes one final daring drop down the ridge. This time, however, the enemy spots him. Fleeing under heavy fire, Desmond stumbles into a Japanese tunnel. There, he discovers a fallen enemy soldier who had his own life in a final act of honor. The tunnel is used as a covert pathway for enemy movement, forcing Desmond to stay hidden as Japanese soldiers cross through. He remains undetected until he stumbles upon a wounded Japanese soldier. Staying true to his beliefs as a medic, Desmond administers morphine and bandages the man's wounds, refusing to see him as an enemy. By the time he escapes the tunnel, night has fallen, but darkness doesn't stop him. Desmond continues rescuing soldiers, his hands torn and bleeding, ignoring the pain as he prays for strength. He even ends up lowering several wounded Japanese soldiers, along with his own men. At dawn, Glover is left speechless when he sees dozens of injured men being brought in from the battlefield. One of the rescued soldiers finally tells him the truth. The same man they all once called a coward had done it alone. Meanwhile, Desmond stumbles upon Howell and another soldier, both injured but alive.
You okay here for a while?
Yeah, fine. Get out of here.
After carrying the wounded private to safety, he immediately turns back for his sergeant. A Japanese sniper locks onto him and fires, but his helmet miraculously deflects the bullet, saving his life. Howell still has a few rounds left in his rifle, so Desmond makes a bold move. He deliberately runs, drawing the sniper's attention. The sniper fires again, revealing his position, allowing Howell to take him down with a well-placed shot. With the immediate threat neutralized, Desmond begins dragging Howell to safety. As they retreat, Japanese soldiers spot them and give chase. Howell fires back, covering their escape while Desmond pushes forward, refusing to leave his sergeant behind. As soon as Howell reaches the bottom of the ridge, Desmond makes his own daring leap to safety. Japanese soldiers peer over the edge, ready to finish him off. But before they can fire, Glover and his men take them down, having arrived just in time to assist the last survivors. Desmond is greeted with the highest respect and is immediately taken to the field hospital. There, he receives the heartbreaking news that the other medic on the team did not survive. Later, Glover visits him, offering a sincere apology for underestimating him. He admits that Desmond has done more for their country than anyone else. Glover then explains that they will return to Hacksaw Ridge the next day, Saturday. He acknowledges that it is Desmond's Sabbath and tells him he will respect his decision if he chooses to observe it instead of joining them. Desmond, however, agrees to go. The entire unit waits for him to finish his prayers before launching the attack. This time, the Americans catch the Japanese off guard. With the long-awaited reinforcements and the tunnel Desmond had previously discovered, the battle quickly turns in their favor. At one point, a small group of Japanese soldiers steps forward, waving a white flag as if surrendering. But it's a trick. They get close enough to throw a bundle of grenades at the Americans. The enemy soldiers are gunned down immediately, but Desmond is still injured while attempting to deflect a grenade to save his team. As the battle rages on, the other soldiers carry Desmond on a stretcher, rushing him off the battlefield. Only when they realize he has dropped something do they stop. His Bible. They retrieve it and place it back in his hands before continuing. The Americans ultimately claim victory, securing Hacksaw Ridge after the Japanese unit leader his own life in a ritual seppuku to atone for their failure. In real life, Desmond Doss saved 75 wounded soldiers from the battlefield at Hacksaw Ridge. He became the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor, the highest award for bravery under fire in the United States. Desmond and Dorothy remained married until her passing in 1991. Despite his heroism, he never sought recognition, always giving credit to his faith and believing that the real heroes were the ones who never made it home. He passed away in 2006 at the age of 87.